Now, the international break is nearly over, which means it's time to start talking about Game Week 12. And in this video, I'm going to go through expected points, clean sheet odds, and who is the best captain. Everything you need to know ahead of Game Week 12. All right, then I'm going to start off by talking about the top players for expected points by position. And I just wanted to say before I get into things, all of this predicted expected points data comes from Fantasy Football Hub. And there's a link to sign up to Fantasy Football Hub in the description below. I'm going to look at players in each position with a 1 game week view, players in each position with a 5 game week view. I'd suggest, if you're looking to bring a player in, you need to do it with at least 5 game weeks in mind ahead of time, I would suggest. So just looking at 1 game week gives you a view for maybe who to start, who are the best players for this week, in isolation, but you really need to think long term. And then for the defenders, midfielders and forwards, I'm also going to look at the best cheap players, because I find that when you look at the best players for expected points by position, the premium ones sort of rise to the top, whereas goalkeepers, even the cheaper keepers are amongst the best. So I think we'll just show a view of goalkeepers. And here we have it for Game Week 12. Raya is the top goalkeeper, followed by Edison, Pickford, Muric of Ipswich. I think with Man United at home, that's obviously a tough fixture, but I think his points, expected points at least, are propped up by potential for making a good amount of saves in that game. Nick Pope, I actually don't mind him as a goalkeeper option. I think he ticks the box of all the things I would like to see in an FPL goalkeeper. I feel like Newcastle will keep a pretty average amount of clean sheets this season, and Nick Pope will make a lot of saves. Then you got Leno against Wolves and Kepa against Brighton. So this is a view for the next 5 game weeks. So Raya is top, Edison second, so top 2 is still the same. Muric, according to Fantasy Football Hub, is actually the 3rd best goalkeeper for expected points. I've got to say, I think that's largely propped up again by the fact that he's just expected to get saves bonus every game. So that's a potential consideration for you. I'm not too sure how many clean sheets Ipswich will actually keep, though. Emiliano Martinez is 4th, Pickford in 5th. You've got Verbruggen and Sanchez up there as well. For me, looking at potentially replacing Flecken, I'm in the sort of sub 5 million price category for a goalkeeper. And seeing Muric, Verbruggen and Sanchez there is certainly food for thought. All right, on to defenders then. And for this just Game Week 12 in isolation, Gabriel is actually top, Nottingham Forest at home being his fixture. I put Guardiola as the image there because, well, I'm thinking my team and thinking selfishly. Probably quite a lot of people are on Guardiola. You can see 31.7% ownership compared to Gabriel on 22. And I would hedge a bet that a lot of Gabriel owners have... There's a large proportion of that percentage, I'd suggest, that have had him since the start of the season and probably have an inactive team. So for me, I'm potentially considering making a sideways swap from Guardiola to Gabriel, and you'll see with the fixtures coming up why that makes sense. Timber, 5.5 million. With Ben White injured, I think his place in that Arsenal team, looks to be pretty nailed on. Saliba as well. I mean, Timber and Saliba are sort of second and third best defenders behind Gabriel for Arsenal, I'd suggest. Senesi of Bournemouth is up there. Luca Dean and Lewis Hall. Quick look then at the next 5 game weeks, and Gabriel comes out on top, and it doesn't suggest there's a whole lot in it, but I've made a couple of videos before this one talking about how I actually think Arsenal defence are going to be pretty decent options going forwards. They've got some really good fixtures. They're the best defence in the league for the last couple of seasons. Yeah, I think Arsenal defenders could be strong. So outside of the Arsenal defenders and Guardiola, we've got Aït-Nouri, Luca Dean and Estupiñán towards the top of the list for the next 5. And then, like I said, the premium defenders sort of rise to the top in terms of expected points. So it's also worth looking at the best cheap defenders as well. So what I've done here is filtered on expected points for the next 5. And then defenders, we're looking at defenders below 5 million here. Aït-Nouri is top, followed by Luca Dean, Leif Davis of Ipswich, Rico Lewis, Senesi, Kirkez of Brighton, and Lewis Hall. Personally, I can see Senesi is ahead of Kirkez for expected points, but honestly, if you're going for a Bournemouth defender, I just go for Kirkez. They're both as equally nailed on as one another, and Kirkez saves you 0.4 million. Don't mind Lewis Hall as well, potentially considering transferring him into my team for Rico Lewis. Rico Lewis is quite good for expected points here, but I would suggest not so good for expected minutes. Midfielders then, and for Game Week 12 in isolation, Salah comes out on top. He's basically 2 expected points more than any other player. De Bruyne is up there. I'd expect him to play against Tottenham, to be fair. He's joint with Palmer on 5.9 expected points. Palmer with Leicester away. Obviously, Salah and Palmer both got good fixtures there. Might be able to see how the captaincy or the options for captaincy are looking this week. Saka in 4th place, followed by Bruno Fernandes, Heung-min Son and Odegaard. And then for the next 5 game weeks, Salah comes out on top, followed by Palmer. There's a bit of a discrepancy between the two there, you can see in terms of points. Saka in 3rd, Son in 4th, De Bruyne in 5th, Fernandes and Foden in 6th and 7th. And like I said, these are just the most expensive midfielders in the game, and you'd expect them to be, towards the top for expected points given, they're the pricey midfielders basically. So it's also worth looking at the best cheap midfielders, I'd suggest, for the next 5 as well. And despite Tottenham's fixtures taking a bit of a turn, Brennan Johnson is still the best cheap midfielder in the game, according to at least the Fantasy Football Hub expected points. Semenyo is in 2nd. He's probably the best budget midfielder, I'd suggest. The Bournemouth fixtures look really good. And behind Haaland, I think he's taken the 2nd most shots in the Premier League so far this season. Kulusevski and Eze are up there. Garnacho, Madueke and Rodgers as well. On to the forwards, and for game week 12 in isolation, Haaland takes the lead. I mean, he's consistently the top forward. I don't think there's any surprise there. The decision on Haaland or the sort of narrative I'd say around Haaland is not, is he the best forward? It's, is he worth the price point? Isak is in 2nd place. I actually really like Isak going forwards. Got Ollie Watkins, Raul Jimenez, Kai Havertz, Cunha and Nicholas Jackson. And then a view of the forwards for the next 5 game weeks. You've got Haaland, Isak, Wood, Cunha, Watkins, Solanke and Jackson in that order. Not going to spend too long on this because, to be honest, I think most people know what I'd probably say about these players. The only one on this list that I probably wouldn't fancy anymore is Solanke, really. I think if you're looking to spend a little bit more on a striker, you may as well go for Isak. And then if, you have sort of Solanke money or below, your prob's best, or said probs then, that's cringeworthy. You're probably best going for one of the cheaper defenders, forwards, sorry. I'm messing up all my words here. Which looks like this. Chris Wood is top, although I would say his fixtures definitely turn, and I would suggest that there are other potential cheap forwards that could be in there in his place. Like, for example, Cunha, João Pedro, Raul Jimenez, Wissa, or Evan Nilsson. All of those 5 players are genuinely pickable in the game, I'd suggest. And I don't think there's a whole much to separate them. Calvert-Lewin, though, I mean, he's been a bit of a fraud this season, hasn't he? He's at the bottom for the cheap forwards, and that's where I'd put him to. And that moves us on quite nicely to the captaincy. And I think it's a really tough call between 3 players this week. And I thought to kick it off, I'd look at a couple of expected predicted points models. So here we've got FPL Review. It has Haaland on top, 7.7 expected points. Salah on 7.4. I'd suggest 0.3 expected points is hardly anything, really. That's really close. That's what I'm trying to say. Fantasy Football Hub, 8.6 for Haaland, 7.7 for Salah. It actually has Isak ahead of Palmer on expected points, which is quite interesting. But I think for me, the 3 captains options would be Haaland, Salah and Palmer. And looking at the stats, the numbers that they've put up so far this season, there isn't really a whole lot to separate them. All have made 11 appearances, and genuinely all of them, well, Haaland and Palmer have 12 attacking returns and Salah is on 14. So when you look at the level of returns they've all gotten this season, there isn't really a whole lot to separate it, which I think leaves us down to analysing the fixture that each of the players have. And what I've got here is the goals against and expected goals against data for their opposition or respective opposition. This is from Understat. I'll leave a link in the description to Understat. And I think the stats here tell one story, but the state of play with these teams is kind of another. So Tottenham are by far and away better defensively statistically than Leicester in Southampton, right? But it certainly looks like Van de Ven is going to be injured. He's going to miss game week 12. And I believe Romero picked up an injury during international break or beforehand as well. So it looks like Tottenham could be without both Romero and Van de Ven. Playing the high line as they do, and doesn't like to change the system. So it looks like it's probably going to be, Dragusan and Ben Davies at centre-back with a high line against Man City at the Etihad with Erling Haaland. So I think that's a great leveller in terms of the fixtures, right? Had Van de Ven and Romero been playing for Tottenham, I'd suggest there's a semi-decent chance with the form that Haaland is in for Man City and Man City are in general. There's a semi-decent chance that they could have kept him quiet. but I don't think Ben Davies and Dragosan will. And looking at the other fixtures, Salah's obviously got Southampton away and Palmer's got Leicester away. I really don't think there's anything between those two teams at all. You can see they've conceded exactly the same amount of goals and pretty much the same expected goals conceded. Personally, if you ask my opinion, I'm favouring Haaland at the moment because I just think that makeshift Tottenham defence, with the high line that they play and the fact that it's the home fixture, I think traditionally Haaland does perform better at the Etihad than he does away from home. Whereas obviously, yeah, Liverpool and Chelsea are away. I would, if you were to ask my opinion, I'd suggest that you captain Haaland. But hopefully the data I've given you here, so you've got the stats for each player that they've put up this season, courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub, and then the opposition analysis of the strength of the opposition defences. So I'm picking Haaland, but hopefully that data allows you to pick your own captain. And just to round things off, I've got some clean sheet odds data from a news source, Fantasy Football Pundit. I'll leave a link to this in the description below. I always say I would feel comfortable starting defenders with 30% or above clean sheet odds. And, well, I'd say Everton in 29 are basically there. Man City, Chelsea, Man United, Fulham, Villa, Newcastle, and then Liverpool and Arsenal. They're the best teams this week for clean sheet odds. You can see it there. And like I said, 30% or above is where I'd consider starting defenders if I had a benching headache or a decision to make. And it does look like Arsenal, 54% to keep a clean sheet, according to Fantasy Football Pundit. That is, you know, if you just think of it, basic odds, 54% is more likely than not. So that suggests to me that Arsenal are quite likely to keep a clean sheet and are the best team for the projection this week. All right, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. I'm pretty sure that covers everything I usually do in the Ultimate Guide video series. If you've got any questions for me, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And yeah, let me know if you agree or disagree with those expected points totals and my thoughts on captaincy as well. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, please leave me a like rating. Like I said, let me know in the comments your thoughts on this video. And yeah, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. It should be just there on your screen. That just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video.